Hello everybody, my name is Matthew. These are the most expensive pieces of paper that I've ever bought. You're watching Carbon Anonymous, and this is everything you need to know about solar panels in 10 minutes or less. Welcome to the first video in my climate change solution series, where I explain different climate change solutions in 10 minutes or less. Now, as you can imagine, explaining anything in 10 minutes means that we're going to have to stick to the essentials. So if there's extra context, I'm just going to throw that up here. Feel free to pause the video and read it as you will. That being said, why start with solar panels? Well, I don't know if you've noticed, I have. Solar panels are popping up everywhere. In fact, I pulled the data and it looks like this. This graph shows how many solar panels the world has installed since the early 2000s, all the way up until 2023. It's measured in gigawatts, and to put that in normal people terms, 1 gigawatt of solar capacity can meet the power needs of roughly 200,000 homes. Now, this graph looks like it's accelerating upwards, and if you haven't been to school in a while, I'll remind you that a trend like this is called exponential growth, where we double our previous capacity every 2 to 3 years. In fact, if I update this with 2024 numbers, we've already installed 2,000 gigawatts of solar capacity, or enough to power nearly 400 million homes. So why is this happening, and why now? Well, we're going to answer that question, but to do that, we're going to have to cover 4 different topics: how solar panels work, their economics, their drawbacks, and finally, their future. So without further ado, let's throw a timer up in this top right corner, and let's get started. Solar panels are fairly straightforward. I mean, it's in the name. They convert sunlight into electricity using a phenomenon known as the photoelectric effect, which basically means as long as the sun is out, you're generating free electricity, because thank God the sun isn't a subscription service. Now, if solar panels rely on the sun, you probably want to install them somewhere that's sunny. A solar panel in California, for example, is much better at its job than one in northern Scotland. That's great and all, but why care about solar panels in the first place? Well, that's because of energy. In fact, energy is the single largest source of greenhouse gases in the world. And note, energy and electricity are not synonymous in this context. Energy can mean many things like heating, transport, or electricity. Which means if we're going to address climate change, we have to solve all of our energy needs, like replacing our furnace with an electric heat pump, or your gas car for an EV. But, as you can imagine, if we're going around electrifying everything and decide just to burn coal to generate that electricity, we're not going to get very far. So ensuring that our electricity comes from low carbon sources like solar panels is essential, as it underpins our entire fight against climate change. Solar panels are much older than you think. In fact, this first solar panel we ever created was made by a guy named Charles Fritts in 1883. To put this in context, Thomas Edison didn't create the first practical light bulb until 1879. So solar panels are only 5 years younger than light bulbs. So if solar panels aren't new, why are we only building them now? Well, it's because of a problem that I think is going to keep popping up for this whole climate change solution series. And that is, just because we can technically do something does not mean that we can financially do something. Solar panels are the quintessential example of this problem, because for a very long time, they've been very expensive. The first solar panels that we ever created generated electricity for a cost of $2,250 per watt. To put that in perspective, to power a 5-watt phone charger, that would have costed you more than $11,000. Now, I'm an environmentalist, but that's way too expensive. So that's what I mean. Could we technically build solar panels? Yes. Could we financially build solar panels? Absolutely not. However, that's changed. In fact, solar panels now in 2025 are full stop, no ifs, ands, or buts, the cheapest source of electricity we have. So how do we get from crazy expensive to crazy cheap? That story starts in outer space, actually. the first practical use for solar panels. In the 1960s, we were sending satellites very far away, which begged the question, how are we going to power them? We can't use a diesel generator, there's no oxygen. We couldn't use windmills, there's no air. And although you could possibly use nuclear, I think it'd be very difficult to convince people you weren't just making a nuclear missile. So solar panels were quite literally the only option. This first application started what is known as the learning effect, which is essentially a positive feedback loop of just making things cheaper. Essentially, by researching how to make solar panels for space, we learned how to make them cheaper, more efficient, and more durable, which opened up new markets, which meant we had to build more solar panels. So we learned how to make them better, which brought down the price, which opened up new markets. And the feedback loop just keeps on repeating. This feedback loop initiated a plummet in the prices of solar panels. The prices just kept dropping as solar panels continued to have more applications. You want to lower your electricity bill on your house? Solar panels. You want to live off grid and be a hermit? Solar panels. You own a factory and you want to reduce your operating costs? Solar panels. You want to install touchless faucets? Solar panels. However, to bring up the price of solar panels and not to mention China would be a huge disservice because China does what China does best, and that is building a lot of things for very cheap. So because solar panels are so cheap, does that mean we can throw out the rest of our energy infrastructure? Well, not really, because as I pointed out earlier, as long as the sun is out, you're generating free electricity. So that begs the question, what happens when there is no sun? What happens when it's nighttime or cloudy or there's shadows? This is referred to as the intermittency problem. So that's the big caveat for solar. You do get free electricity, but you can't choose when you produce it. With other energy sources like coal or natural gas, you may have to pay for the fuels, but that means you get to choose when and how much electricity you produce. This is important because our electricity grids are constantly playing this game of tightrope, trying to balance supply and demand. Because if you don't meet that, you get rolling blackouts. Introducing an energy source like solar, where supply can't be controlled, makes things that little bit harder. Now, some skeptics really like to emphasize this intermittency problem, but as we can see from how much solar we're building, it's not that big of a problem, and there's two reasons for that. The first reason is that although we're growing, we still don't generate that much electricity from solar. Most countries are less than 5%. Australia is leading the pack at like 17%, but that's only because they have the benefit of installing solar panels upside down. I'm joking, of course. Australia isn't real. The second reason it's not a problem is because we already have the solution, and they're called batteries. Now, this is a conversation for another video, but the gist of it is when you're producing too much energy from solar, you just charge batteries. And then when the sun's gone, the battery charges the grid. And this is working great. In fact, it's actively scaling. California, for example, has 13 gigawatts worth of battery storage already. The great news is that solar plus batteries is still cost competitive against other sources like coal. The bad news is that while we might solve the day-to-day variation with batteries, seasonal variation is a much trickier problem. For example, where I'm originally from, Alberta, Canada, you can generate almost 6 times the amount of electricity in the summer than you can in winter. And this is just simply because winter days are much shorter and the sun is usually much lower in the sky. Unfortunately, batteries can't help us with this because while it's one thing to store enough energy for a day, it's a completely different thing to hold enough energy for a season. Now, there's a bunch of contenders in this space for long-term energy storage, hydrogen being an interesting example. But it's important to point out that none of these technologies are actually scaling like solar and batteries are. So let's wrap up by talking about the future a bit. In 2023 at COP28, or Conference of the Parties 28, a terrible name, but is essentially where all of our diplomats go to argue about climate change once a year, we set a goal to triple the amount of solar panels that we have by 2030. And the crazy thing is we might actually achieve that. We need to emphasize the fact that we made a climate goal that we might actually achieve. I cannot express enough how cathartic it is that we might actually achieve a climate goal. As a climate scientist, I have heard thousands of promises, thousands of targets that were never ever going to come into fruition. So the fact that we've made a target that we might actually achieve, that's record breaking. The International Energy Agency projects that we'll have nearly 6,000 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2030, or enough to power 1.2 billion homes. Now, this is a projection, so take it with a grain of salt. We may be overestimating, but we may also be underestimating. In fact, historically, the IEA has underestimated how quickly solar will grow. Now, we are going to have some growing pains. Intermittency, for example, will continue to remain a problem for many higher latitude countries, and we may also see supply chain issues. China is a dominant player in not only the installation of solar, but also the production of solar. In fact, they account for nearly 80% of all solar panel production. Now, this may cause some issues as the world is throwing around tariffs like crazy, but the facts remain. Solar panels used to be too expensive to work, now they're too cheap to fail. In fact, we project that solar panels will become the dominant source of electricity production, surpassing both coal and natural gas by at least 2033. Boom! Killed it. That is everything you need to know about solar panels in 10 minutes or less. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. And I mean, please subscribe. It's going to help a lot getting this YouTube channel off the ground. But also, if you think there's anything I missed about solar panels, put them in the comments below. Lastly, my name is Matthew. This has been Carbon Anonymous, and thank you for watching.